live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening, I'm James McPherson, filling in for Rita Panahi, who is back in a couple of weeks. Well, more proof the government's green dream is just that, a dream. I'll explain why shortly. The royal family is in turmoil, with Charles warned to cut all ties with Prince Andrew following the release of the Jeffrey Epstein documents. Will we soon be restricted from travelling? There's talk that carbon passports could be introduced. And you don't want to miss this. Coming up, Andrew Klavan, one of Australia's most esteemed authors whose works have been turned into major Hollywood films and a political commentator with the Daily Wire, joins me to discuss why he thinks it's the Democrats, not Donald Trump, who are a threat to democracy. But first, figures released this week show the number of Victorian public servants has jumped by a whopping 60% over the past 15 years. By comparison, the New South Wales Public Service grew by 28% over the same period. How to explain Victoria's need for so many more bureaucrats? It wouldn't have anything to do with Victoria being under Labor rule for most of that time, would it? Labor do like to boast about their commitment to providing services. That must be it. The fact that employing lots of people makes their union masters happy is, I'm sure, entirely coincidental. Except Productivity Commission figures published in The Australian seem to indicate that the more staff the Victorian government employ, the worse results long-suffering Victorians who pay their wages get compared to other states. In 2021-22, Victoria Police had more operational staff per capita than any other state, and yet the rate of physical assaults per 100,000 people in Victoria was 300 higher than in New South Wales. The availability of hospital beds was worse in Victoria than in other states. And ambulance wait times, well, they were a shocker. Only 63% of emergency patients were seen on time, compared to 77% in New South Wales. So it begs the question, what did Victoria get for all these public servants? I mean, apart from world-class non-stop spin from the overstaffed Premier's office, I mean. Education? Well, Victoria's public servants had a significantly lower student-to-teacher ratio than other states, so that's a win, but it didn't translate into better NAPLAN results. So even when Victorians win, they still lose. Victoria, the highest number of public servants producing the worst levels of service. But should we really be surprised? This is exactly how socialist ideology works, is it not? You create a massive state administration that's ideologically committed to the utopian fantasy that the state will create a much fairer and more efficient society than free enterprise. The reality, though, is that people use the power of the state to create secure, high-paying, low-accountability jobs with no pressure to be efficient or effective. And so what you end up with is a bankrupt state full of very happy Labor-voting public servants, or, as some like to call it, Argentina. When Labor Health Minister Mary-Ann Thomas was asked this week to justify the bloated public service, well, I listened to what she said and almost fell off my seat.
Well, let's be clear. We saw an increase in our public service numbers during the COVID pandemic. We make no apologies for putting on the staff that we needed to keep Victorians safe, to ensure that we were delivering support to business and so on.
Didn't Victoria end up with more COVID-related deaths than any other state? Victoria delivered arguably the worst COVID response in the developed world. What were all these public servants doing during COVID? I mean, obviously they were taking a wage, unlike small business owners who weren't allowed to work, and obviously they were doing a lot of internal polling so the government could work out which science was most convenient to follow. But I mean, apart from that, Victoria, with a record $178 billion debt, now has a state payroll it financially can't afford to service and politically can't afford to cut. I guess they can always borrow more money, right? Australia should be the richest country in the world. Instead, we have a growing number of politicians and public servants with barely enough private sector workers and businesses to pay for them, not to mention the growing number of welfare recipients they administer. Lucky the world is still buying our coal. Oh, hang on a second. Labor want to stop that too. I wonder if anyone wants to buy, bananas. Well, let's head to South Australia now, where a family is in mourning after a 54-year-old man has died waiting 10 hours for an ambulance. This is a tragic story and more proof, as if any were needed, of the crisis in our health system. Joining me now is South Australian opposition leader David Spears. David, thanks for your time. This South Australian man called 000, suffering abdominal pain and vomiting. He was told an ambulance would be sent, and it was 10 hours later. By the time it got there, he'd passed away. We're meant to be in a first world country. This is just a disgrace.
Well, James, it certainly is. And Peter Malinauskas, the Premier here, he comes across as a very decent guy, but he's not running a very decent government, that's for sure. A lot of spin. We've got a Premier who's a Premier for the good times and doesn't like fronting up when things get tough. Many of your listeners and viewers would remember that he ran on a platform to fix the ramping crisis here in South Australia. It's nearly 3 times worse now than when the Liberals were in government. We've had a situation in the last couple of weeks where senior medicos have claimed that they're actually moving patients from the ramp to the ED in front of patients who might be sicker. There's claims that patients have died as a consequence of that. And just in the last couple of days, we've had these revelations that this very, very unfortunate, tragic situation has unfolded where a man waited 10 hours for an ambulance, and by the time it arrived, it was too late. This is a government here in South Australia that said it would fix the ramping crisis. Its central commitment would be around health, and that's just not been the case at all.
Yeah, well, as you say, I mean, it's 2 years since they were elected, and clearly they've not fixed this issue at all. In fact, videos from the night the now deceased man called 000 show 17 ambulances queuing outside the Royal Adelaide Hospital alone. Now, there's a formal review that's been launched, but I mean, that's going to be zero comfort for the deceased man's family and friends.
Well, there's review after review with this government. I think we last counted there's about 100 reviews being undertaken by Labor. That's their way of trying to delay the inevitable outcome of their mismanagement and maladministration. We've got a review into whether they are playing around with the ambulance ramp to try and pull patients into the ED in front of patients who need help and care more urgently. We've got a review now into why this man waited 10 hours for an ambulance. He was a priority 5, which initially was quite low priority. He should have been seen within 60 minutes. 60 minutes. He had to wait 10 times that length of time. This is a government that said they would fix this situation, and it's far, far poorer than what it was a couple of years ago. I've called today. I've really gone out further than I normally would and said the health minister should be sacked, Chris Picton, because he has completely lost control of our health system here. I had a situation where a paramedic contacted my electorate office a few days ago and said that they had to contact Uber Eats to deliver food to the ramp to keep them going. They'd been there for so long. That is not a first world-class health system. When we were in government, we had to manage COVID-19 and all the drama around that. Labor made this bold claim they would fix the ramping crisis. They would get on top of all this stuff. It's 3 times worse. And I can tell you, South Australians are getting pretty cynical about this.
Well, I was going to ask you, if you're a South Australian suffering a medical emergency, what would you advise? Call 000, or are you better off calling an Uber and hoping the driver has some medical expertise?
Well, that's the exact question I've been asked in a press conference today. I'm very reluctant to give medical advice. I'm very far from being a medical. You want people to dial 000 in the first instance, of course. But if that ambulance isn't forthcoming, what are people supposed to do? Die at home, or take their loved ones, or take themselves, if they can, to an emergency department, where, of course, they may wait for many, many hours. This is a real breach of faith with the South Australian community, because they did vote our government out. We were only in government for 4 years. We thought we were making headway. Well, our last recordable month of statistics in terms of the Liberal government's performance, 1,500 hours lost on the ramp. Some would say that's not very good. Well, the last recordable month, it was 3,500. The month before that, it was 4,280. So Labour are doing pretty abhorrently here. People are dying. And we've got a Premier who's here for the good times. For those who know Peter Malinauskas, he loves the events. He loves the stage. He loves the selfie on social media. But he doesn't love fronting up when the going gets tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute tragedy that a man has lost his life. And moving forward, if you're a South Australian, I mean, when you dial 000, you think, OK, it's good, someone's on their way. But now you're going to be second-guessing what's happening, and that is only going to create more dangerous situations. David Spears, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, David. Well, it's been another big news day, so let's get across it all with Sky News host Caroline De Russo. Caroline, no doubt you'll have more to say on the royal report a little later, but Charles has been told to cut all ties with Prince Andrew in the wake of the release of the Jeffrey Epstein documents. So the question is, do you think he will?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I mean, look, he's been about as defrocked as he can be defrocked by royal standards. He was at Christmas, which was interesting and noted by quite a number of people. And obviously we've known for, a couple of weeks that these sorts of allegations were going to surface at some stage. So it is interesting that he was at Christmas, the whole family was at Christmas. Do I ultimately think he'll cut his brother off? I'm not sure that he will, but I think they'll be wanting to keep this as quiet as possible. And in the great royal tradition, try and say as little as possible.
Indeed. Let's come closer to home. One of Labor's most pro-Palestine ministers, Tony Burke, has called on hate preachers in his Western Sydney electorate to stop with their anti-Semitic rants. Now, Tony Burke's been very weak on calling out hate speech from these Islamic preachers. So does this sudden concern come from conviction, or do you think it might come from internal polling?
Well, I think it has to be political of some description. I don't think it's necessarily related to any conviction. I mean, as far as this whole issue has been concerned, Tony Burke has got more splinters on his backside than anyone, given the amount of time he's spent fence sitting. Look, I think it's probably, even for Tony Burke, it's gotten a little bit too loose. It's got a little bit too heated, that he knows that there are broader repercussions throughout the electorate and their community. OK, there might be people who do sympathise with the Palestinians. There are people who would like to see a Palestinian state, no doubt, but there are very, very few people, probably not only in his electorate but in the broader community, who are blatant and rampant anti-Semites. So I think the water has got a little bit warm, and that's what happens when the frog goes into cold water, mate. As you well know, it warms up, and then all of a sudden it gets very uncomfortable.
I reckon you're right. When I read that front page headline on The Australian and saw Tony Burke speaking against hate speech, I thought, gee, it's worse than we thought when they're coming out speaking against it. Listen, more proof that the government's green energy dream is just that, a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. New figures today show the government has been unable to fill what it's calling clean energy apprenticeships. That's renewable energy superpower talk for Sparkies to help completely rewire the grid. They've created 10,000 apprenticeships, but less than 2,000 people have signed up for them. So how can the government expect to have renewables responsible for 82% of the energy grid by 2030 if we don't have the workforce to support it?
And this is what happens when decisions are made about face. This is what happens when you start with an outcome you want and then announce the outcome and then hopefully try and get all the other bits to slot in behind it and then, bless yourself and hope that it works. Unfortunately, you want to go and do something like, miles of transmission lines. You want to go and do these big energy projects. You want to go and put up solar panels and wind turbines and all this. Well, you need trades to be able to do that. So you can't promise to deliver on something because I'm sure this stuff comes flat packed. I think it's like IKEA pieces, most of it. But someone still needs to put it together. And Unfortunately, I don't think the government has really thought about that in this pursuit of, we need to do this and we need to do this this very quickly. The other thing too, James, is that you've got a number of state governments who are also embarking on big infrastructure projects. And so you've got tradies being torn between state government projects, federal government projects, and then obviously we need more domestic housing, and you've got them torn between those sorts of projects as well. So this is what happens when it all lands at once.
Exactly. I mean, if all these new tradies are building new transmission lines, who's building new homes? Remember the housing crisis, as you rightly point out. And even if you can find a tradie, the wait to build or renovate a home in Sydney has blown out to record levels thanks to massive delays for development application decisions by councils. The New South Wales Labor government, as an example, they want to build 75,000 new homes annually, but people are waiting on average 139 days for DA approval. So fat chance the housing target will ever be met.
Yeah, and particularly when you want to, or you have housing targets that are relatively short term, you're talking 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, when you have that sort of delay, you know, annexed to the front, that there is actually a large proportion of time on the way to that target. And that's assuming, obviously, that approval lands on day one. Look, this is an issue across the country. And this is why when we talk about housing, the idea that the federal government is going to build houses, the federal government isn't going to build a single house in this country. It requires all three levels of government to work together and pull in the same direction in order to get these sorts of things done. And as the situation is in Australia, and it's not just in the East Coast, it happens here as well in WA, when you've got different levels of government taking their sweet time to do whatever, and because, you know, they're busy with, you know, climate crisis and which flag they're flying out the front and all that other stuff, they're actually not doing the things that they should be doing. And then this is why we end up with these monstrous delays.
So, Caroline, you're saying the government housing targets are Buckley's and none?
I think they are rather optimistic, James.
Well, to prove just how out of touch this government is, new modelling shows that householders are working harder than ever, but earning less than they were before the pandemic. There's interest rates, cost of living, rents, they're all hammering us. No doubt people are feeling the pinch, and yet the government wants us to wait another 5 months minimum before we see any relief at all. I mean, you had to roll your eyes when Anthony Albanese said, we're going to provide cost of living relief in May. And he added this, he said, I've asked people to look into what we can do. Wasn't this the man who came to government saying, we've got a plan?
Yes, a plan for disappointing the nation. Look, the fact is, James, what are they going to do? There needs to be more. Well, look, we know that they can't just hand out money because then that there is inflationary and we go around the mountain again.
Right.
We have seen very, very sluggish real wages. We have seen a fall in living standards. We have seen a fall in productivity. There is a systemic issue in here. In addition to just there being a cost of living crisis. Unfortunately, not dissimilarly to the infrastructure projects, everything has landed all at once. And we have seen a huge fall in living standards. People don't have the same purchasing power that they did previously. And then there are people calling for those stage 3 tax cuts to be cut. Well, that there is actually just getting rid of bracket creep. That is actually just giving people back more of their own money to do with as they please. And I think there'd be some people that would need it for their mortgage. There would be some people that would need it for expenses, which I appreciate can in circumstances be inflationary. And there are some people who wouldn't mind putting away a little bit more of a nest egg if they can, because I think a few people have been sailing a little closer to the wind than they would have liked to.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Caroline DeRusso, thanks for your time. We're looking forward to watching you on The Royal Report straight after this show. Well, after the break, artificial intelligence. Should we be excited or should we be worried? That's next. Welcome back. Well, for many people, their experience with AI has been self-scanning groceries at the supermarket or playing around with ChatGPT at home. but advances in artificial intelligence are moving ahead at lightning speed. Some say AI is the next best thing. Others say it's even bigger than that. It's going to change everything and perhaps even transform what it means to be human. And while some salivate at the possibilities, others, like former Google boss Eric Schmidt, have warned that AI could destroy the world. So, which is it? Joining me now is futurist Mel Fletcher. Mel, are we going to see robots taking over the world? Is it going to be like a Blade Runner-esque kind of future? Just what can we expect from AI?
Hi, James. Good to be with you. Look, I think a lot of the fear that we see about AI, we're right to be cautious, but the fear that some people express is down to misunderstanding some of the terms we use. For example, AI refers, at least at this point in time, to narrow intelligence. It's good at carrying out complex single-level tasks, like winning a game of chess, but it's not so good at dealing with multiple-level tasks simultaneously in the way that the brain does every day. So for the moment, at least, we're well short of what technologists call artificial general intelligence, which is where a machine can do almost anything a human can do. Now, the speed is picking up, speed of development, so we need to be careful. And the next big AI might be trained on mathematics and visual patterns, which means it could become logical in its thinking, more meaningful in its conversations with us. But we're still the ones that have the moral choice at this point.
Sorry, you just said two things there that got my attention. You said that AI robots could become more logical and they could engage in more, did you say meaningful conversation? How do we get to a point where robots have logic and that they can communicate with meaning?
Well, the meaning question is a big one, and we might come to the subject of consciousness in a moment, if you like. But AI represents a value-neutral intelligence. Machines are amoral, so we're the ones who make the ethical choices. And as the tech develops, our ethical role is going to become more important. So when it comes to issues like meaning and fluid conversations with machines, some tech pioneers are worried that these things will develop under their own steam in ways we can't understand or control, but we're nowhere near that yet. And that's why I'm advocating we need to start having wide-ranging debates, cast the net wider than just politicians and technologists, and start involving people like engineers, biologists, medical experts, people in ethics, even theology. If we're going to create AI that benefits humanity, we need to first understand what it truly means to be human. And we all need to move beyond simply trusting tech, James. We need to start asking questions about what are the ethical things to do with these techs and how can we apply that in any given situation.
I want to come back to those questions in a moment, but let me talk to you about this. AI is currently being used to bring musicians back to life. Elvis Presley died 66 years ago, but he's got a new stage show starting in November, performing as a hologram, which raises the question, if you attend, can you say you've seen Elvis perform or not?
I doubt it. I mean, the avatars here in London, you can't really say you've seen ABBA just because you've seen holograms presented. I think AI will keep surprising us in the arts and in everyday life, and there's a lot of benefits to it. You know, in education, in the same way that we would go to concerts, we might see immersive learning experiences. Learning a language could become a fully immersive experience rather than a piecemeal thing in a classroom. Imagine studying historical events by being able to visit them in virtual space. If you combine virtual reality with AI, it will make that possible in real time. And healthcare, you know, with great developments at the moment with nanobots, microscopic machines built from the atomic level up from cellular material that can, at least in theory, be loaded with chemicals, injected into the bloodstream, and take out harmful cells like cancer while leaving the healthy cells intact. So there's a lot to be said about the immersiveness of AI, but it's not all for the arts.
Sticking with the arts for a minute, Anna Indiana is an AI-generated singer-songwriter, would you believe, with thousands of followers on social media. I'm saying she, I'm not sure what pronouns you use for a robot, but Anna released this song last year. It was described as soulless. Have a listen.
Sitting at my favourite cafe, sipping my tea, it's Saturday, thinking about all he's done to everyone.
Mel, it doesn't exactly move you, does it? But isn't that the problem with AI and music? Music is more than mathematical. It comes from the heart, and AI doesn't fall in love or doesn't suffer heartbreak. So it's only ever going to be elevator music. Am I right?
Well, it might be more than elevator music, James, but it's you're right, one of the great limitations of AI. The one human skill machines can't master is empathy, because that requires a shared human experience, something by definition a machine can't have. So AI might be able to fake empathy through social bots and the like, but we still know it's not the real thing. And there are times when we need the real thing. I think in the arts, we'll come to appreciate the work of human creatives much more in the age of AI. At the moment, let's face it, most AI-generated art, like that clip, is curated by human beings. It's created using a back and forth sequence of program instructions that provide the guidelines for the overall work. And I can see a time in the near future where artists will use AI as a collaborative force in the same way that, say, Michelangelo and Da Vinci did with their apprentices during the Renaissance. So technology on its own won't be able to empathize with the human condition. And that, after all, is the basis of great art.
What about the potential for AI to be used to cause political chaos? I'm thinking of deep fakes. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently did an interview with an AI-generated version of himself. Check this out.
Здравствуйте. Я студент и учусь в Санкт-Петербургском государственном университете. Хочу спросить, правда ли, что у вас много двойников? И еще, как вы относитесь к тем опасностям, которые несет в нашу жизнь искусственный интеллект и нейросети? Спасибо.
Не представился.
Now, we've got important elections in the US and the UK this year. With the entire world getting their news online, the rise of deep fakes is a huge problem, isn't it? How do we know what's real and what's not in the future?
Well, until recently, James, there were ways we could actually train people, and we did it, to identify a deep fake using the naked eye. But AI, as you say, is becoming more sophisticated all the time. So first of all, we will need to use AI itself to help identify material produced by other AI. There are things called embedded watermarks, hidden patterns inside a text or pictures that they're invisible to the human eye, but detectable by computer algorithms. And there are other ways that tech can help us too, but we can't rely completely on them. So we'll need to keep ourselves very well informed on current affairs so that we know the overall direction a story is already taking. We can make sure we read from more than one source, for example. We can be watchful for conspiracy theories that offer these very simplistic, sinister scenarios to explain very complex situations. So no means of IDing deepfakes will ever be foolproof. But at the end of the day, we all need to stay alert.
Absolutely. And watch Sky News. Mel Fletcher, thank you very much for your time. It's great talking to you. Well, after the break, one of America's most esteemed authors and political commentators, Andrew Klavan from the Daily Wire, joins me to discuss why he thinks it's the Democrats, not Donald Trump, who's a threat to democracy. Well, the US presidential election is not due until November, but already the gloves are off. Joe Biden has just released his first campaign video of 2024, which describes his opponents as extremists who want to destroy democracy.
There's an extremist movement that does not share the basic beliefs in our democracy. All of us are being asked right now, what will we do to maintain our democracy? History's watching. The world is watching. Most important, our children and grandchildren will hold us responsible.
Joining me is acclaimed author and political commentator Andrew Klavan. Andrew, this video is being released in time for the third anniversary of January 6, when Biden will give a speech reportedly framing Trump as an existential threat to democracy. So here's my question. Is Trump the threat to democracy, or are the Democrats the threat to democracy, or is everyone in America pretty much trashing democracy?
Well, there's a lot of trashing going on, but it's not the Trump administration that has tried to put its political opponents in jail on completely spurious charges. It's not the Trump administration that investigates Catholics for going to the Latin Mass and parents for showing up at teacher school meetings to stop sexual deviants from harassing their children. It's not the Trump DOJ, the Department of Justice, that tried to cover up the Hunter Biden corruption scandal with a plea deal so bad that even the judge couldn't accept it. And all of that said, I mean, the Democrats have stomped on democracy and have stomped on our, law and order rules. But all that said, Trump has been reckless. you know, January 6th didn't have to happen. He didn't have to behave the way he did during January 6th. He didn't have to claim so loudly that the election had been rigged without being able to prove it in court. That is the way it works. If you want to show that an election needs to be overturned, you have to do it in court. He didn't do that. He gave them the sword with which they're beating him over the head. And it is like the Reichstag fire, like Hitler basically used this minor incident and blew it out of proportion to take his opponent's rights away. The Biden administration are not Nazis, but they are doing the same thing to January 6th. But Trump gave them that position, and he's a very reckless, clumsy politician.
If Trump wins the election, can he bring America together, or will he go after the Democrats just as they've come after him? And there are some on the right who want Trump to do that, you know, drain the swamp, go hard after them.
Yeah, there's plenty on the right who want Trump to do exactly that. Or they're the ones who were chanting "lock her up" when he was running against Hillary Clinton, and Trump actually said no. After he was elected, he said, no, I won't do that. That's not the way America works. Whereas the Biden administration has had absolutely no hesitation to try and lock Trump up. But Trump is a divisive figure. He means to be. He hates the press. He's absolutely right. Our press is completely corrupt. Our media is completely one-sided, corporate owned, and in league with the Democrat Party. So he's absolutely right about it. But the way he does it, it makes it impossible to bring the country together. He's such a loudmouth. He's so belligerent and so rude and so unkind to the people who work for him that it's very hard for him to gather a consensus. I think Trump did an important thing. I think he broke the grip of the deep state in this country, and he broke the grip of a very dishonest news media. But I don't think he has the organizational mind and the discipline that it takes to move us forward. I'd like to see him get out of the way. There's simply no way he's going to do that. People like him. He represents their anger with 60 years of being told that their country stinks by the Democrats. He is a feeling more than a political philosophy, and I think he has a real chance of winning at this point.
Which begs the question, who will be his opponent? Do you think it will be Biden, or will the Democrats replace Biden at the last minute?
I cannot believe it will be Biden. But Biden on New Year's Eve was asked what his favorite food is, and his wife had to remind him that it was ice cream. The guy's mind is shot. I mean, you only have to look. You know, there's no hiding it with all the falling down and the misspoken words and all this. But you only have to go back and look at him 3 years ago, 4 years ago, to see he's an entirely different person. I cannot believe he's going to be the guy. A lot of people in the Republican Party think that the Democrats are going to support Nikki Haley. I don't believe that's a real thing. The Democrats don't have a bench because they've been taken over by the wildest, craziest fools of the far left. So there's nobody to replace him, but I do not see how he can run in the long run.
I want to talk to you about the southern border. Millions of illegal immigrants have been allowed to cross into America since Biden took office, and it doesn't seem to be accidental. In fact, this week the White House sought a court order to cut razor wire at the US-Mexico border, razor wire Texas officials had erected to keep illegals out. What on earth is going on there?
No, it's absolutely intentional. I mean, Biden said when he was running for office, I invite you to come in, you know, give me you're wretched, you're tired, you're poor. He was actually saying to people, if you're running away from oppressors, come to America. We love you. The answers that Alejandro Mayorkas, the head of the Homeland Security Department, is giving to questions about the border are so dishonest, so blandly corrupt that it's obvious that this is a plan. They keep asking for more money for more border guards, but those border guards are then put to use just processing people into the country. The best theory about this is a plan. They think that if they stock up on illegals who then become citizens, who then become voters, they will have brought in a new group of people to vote for their failed policies. That's the biggest thing we're seeing right now is 60 years of failure of Democrat policies, and they have no way to cover it up anymore. So what they're hoping is if they bring in a new group of welfare recipients and cry racism, racism, racism to anyone who doesn't want them to come in, they will have a new voter base. I'm not sure that's a very good strategy, but I'm pretty sure it is their strategy. They mean to change the demographics of the country because they think that's in their favor.
Andrew, I know you're a big fan of White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She was asked to explain why they cut a hole in the razor wire at the border. Have a listen. I want to get your response.
Governor Abbott's razor wire does not prevent. It does not prevent non-citizens from unlawfully crossing. That's not what it does. If anything, it puts at risk, it puts the lives of the Border Patrol at risk. It puts them in danger. That's what the razor wire does.
Are the border control trying to break into Mexico? What on earth is she talking about?
Yeah, it is funny that nobody's traveling in the other direction. This is the kind of po-faced, deadpan dishonesty that we get from this administration. I think it drives people a little crazy because they can turn on their TV if they're watching anything but the mainstream media. They can turn on the TV and watch people pouring in. They're being bused to the cities that brag that they were sanctuary cities. So now New York and Chicago are having problems with them. It is a genuine crisis, and this kind of blank-faced dishonesty doesn't do anything for anybody. What she's talking about is the federal government suing a state for trying to do the job that they won't do. That's what she's talking about. That Texas is trying to keep people out and deport them, and the federal government is saying, no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. We're letting these people in. So it's completely dishonest. And I simply don't think, if you look at the polls, this guy is polling in the negative numbers. I mean, people may turn up just to not vote for him. His plan is to maneuver Trump into being his opponent because they think they can beat him. But right this minute, I'm not sure they can even beat Trump. I do think he's the weakest candidate because the people who love him, but the people who hate him so much, they'll vote for anybody else. But even though he's the weakest candidate, his incompetence and his dishonesty and his corruption have made it possible that Trump could win.
So America needs a distraction, and we got it yesterday with a bunch of people named as associates of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. But despite all these high-profile names, I'm not sure we really learned anything, did we?
No. I mean, think about it for a second. This is not the way a bombshell in a case like this happens. It happens through a trial. And what has happened here is, aside from Jeffrey Epstein amazingly hanging himself in a prison cell where his cellmate had been taken away, the guards had gone off duty, the cameras had been turned off, Ghislaine Maxwell, his girlfriend, is the only person to be put in prison for this. And at no time, to my knowledge, was she offered a plea deal where they said to her, name the Johns, name the guys who showed up and slept with these underage women, and we will give you a better deal. She never was offered that deal. If she was, I don't know about it. And maybe she turned it down because she didn't feel like hanging herself in prison. But the fact is, nobody has gone after these guys to prosecute them. Obviously, the people who did this are compromised. We don't know who they're compromised by, that we don't know how they're compromised, and they're corrupt. I mean, this is a terrible thing to do. It's a terrible thing to use trafficked underage girls, or in fact, trafficked any age girls, for your personal pleasure just because you can get away with it. This is a sickness in our elites. I worked in Hollywood for many years. I think it's going on out there too. I think that the fact that it's being covered up can only be explained by the fact that so many powerful people were involved that nobody wants to take the step of saying, indicting them, of prosecuting them, and getting them, each one, to talk about the next so they can actually round a bunch of people up. This is not going to happen because they take off some redacted black marks on a trial testimony. It's going to happen because some people are arrested and tried, and that's what's not going on.
So let me ask you this. It's a yes or no question. Will we ever learn the truth about Epstein's Island?
No, that's my guess. I cannot believe that no one has the intellectual curiosity to find out how he really died. I really can't. I mean, I'm the opposite of a conspiracy theory. I'm always the last guy to get on that train. But his death is one of the most suspicious events in American history, and nobody seems to have enough curiosity to find out what went down.
Let me change tack for a second. What was more shocking to you, the barbaric October 7 attacks on Israel, or the level of Jew hatred unleashed around the globe immediately after?
I'm sad to say that I was not shocked by the level of anti-Semitism. I had been privately predicting it for over a year. And the reason is because the Jews are basically the authors of our moral order. The Bible and the God of the Bible were given to all of us through Jesus Christ, but they were actually first delivered to us through the Jews. And I think anti-Semitism always and everywhere is an attack on that moral order, an attack on that God. When you have abortion taking place at the levels that it is, when people start to claim that killing babies is a human right, when you have children being butchered to turn their bodies into a costume of the opposite sex, evil is on the rise. And I'm not a crazy guy who sits around and talks about, good and evil and all that, but there's just no other way to put it. And so I've been waiting for the anti-Semitism to rise. What has been shocking in America is the level of stupidity and ignorance of our college students and of the people who teach them. When you have people quoting Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer of the 20th century, as if he were a font of wisdom, you know that these people have been corrupted at the very basic level of human knowledge. These people don't know anything about morals or the moral order or history or anything. They're cheering on. I mean, I keep seeing people who are like queers for Hamas who will kill you for being queer, women for Hamas who run a Gaza in which women are routinely beaten and abused, who raped women to death on October 7th. These people are cheering on the killers in Afghanistan who have killed women's education. They're talking about the great rebels of Vietnam who led to millions of people being killed by communists. They do not, the level of their stupidity and ignorance is absolutely mind-blowing. And that means that they have been schooled to ignorance by the kind of college professors that we now see. We now see them as people like Claudine Gay and Liz McGill, from the top colleges in the country are exposed for their demented ideology. And that part is just incredibly sad. The whole thing is very sad.
Andrew Klavan, it's been an absolute joy to speak to you. Thank you for your time tonight.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, coming up, could we soon be restricted from travelling? There's talk carbon passports could be introduced. More on that with my panel next. Welcome back. Well, let's have some fun to end the week. Joining me now is political commentator Rocco Liacano and podcaster Andrew Gray. Now, I want to put to both of you gentlemen whether or not you own an electric vehicle. And if you did, would you be confident of its performance in a natural disaster? We're all aware of the government's push for people to buy EVs, but aren't we forgetting an important aspect? If you need to make a quick escape during a bushfire or cyclone, what happens if power's been down for a few days already and you haven't been able to charge your car? Rocco, a lot of these natural disasters hit places that are quite remote or regional. So do you reckon the inner city Greens have considered this?
Andrew, good evening, James and Andrew. No, of course they haven't, because they are practitioners of slacktivism at its finest. Slacktivism, the practice of appearing to stand for something, but with no substance at play and at zero cost. And of course, these people seem to forget that these EVs are made, a lot of them are made in China and India, in factories that are powered by fossil fuels. So look, they completely living in a parallel universe to the reality that the rest of us have to face.
Well, speaking of, parallel universes and realities, isn't this just proof, Andrew, that this whole green dream really is just a dream?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% it is. Look, the infrastructure simply is not there, and the minimal infrastructure that they do have is barely enough to go around for the EVs we've got now. Take a typical scenario of an EV owner who goes down to their local town to go to Woolies or their favourite coffee shop. If they're lucky enough to find a charging station, they go do their shopping, they come back, there's their little EV looking sad and dejected because someone's come along and unplugged them and plugged their own car in. The infrastructure isn't there. And I think the truth is that for the foreseeable future, the vision of Mr Albanese and Mr Bowen is more fantasy than reality.
I reckon you might be right. I've got to laugh not just at the whole EV fantasy, but you've got to laugh at how woke some people are. I was reading The Australian and I came across this story by a travel writer pontificating about how climate change is going to affect travel. Now, I'm thinking he's going to go on about heat waves or floods, but instead, he's predicting that in 2024, everyone's going to be obsessing over how much carbon they emit when they fly off on holidays. Rocco, when you book an overseas trip or fly interstate, are you thinking about, how much carbon emissions am I emitting? And do you even care?
The priority when you get to the airport is to make sure you get there on time to catch the flight. And look, why should I even care about that when just before Christmas we had a conference which 20,000 people attended, most of them travelling on private jets in an oil-rich country, obsessing about climate change. And of course, one of the emirs, his name escapes me right now, belled the cat and said, look, there is simply no evidence for any of this. So look, what my carbon emissions are when I get on a plane, the last thing on my mind.
Andrew, this suggestion that we're going to be hit at some point with carbon passports. So you'll be allocated a specific amount of carbon that is yours to use, but once you've used it, that's it. No more flying off to the Gold Coast or going to Europe. What do you reckon the chances, and how do you feel about that? I mean, it's going to save the world, right?
Well, look, I don't think there's any doubt that governments and other bureaucrats are going to try to foist this upon us. However, I don't think it's such a bad idea with a few tweaks. And we start by tweaking the name, and we call it the hypocrisy passport. The way it works is that if you love this idea of preaching at the rest of us about the size of our carbon footprint, you get measured by how much you actually practice what you preach. The less you practice, the less you fly. I mean, think of how many of these self-appointed elites and puffed up celebrities we could get out of the skies. I think the result will be there'll be so much imaginary carbon removed from the atmosphere that you and I will be able to fly wherever we want, when we want. I think it's a fantastic idea.
I like it. The problem with this, of course, is that you're going to be able to buy more emissions, and so the rich will be able to travel freely, and the rest of us we'll just have to sit at home, which was going to be my suggestion. Well, you could just stay home and watch old James Bond movies, but woke-tards won't let you do that either. The British Film Institute has slapped a trigger warning on early James Bond films because they could, and I quote, cause offence today. Andrew, Gone with the Wind needed this disclaimer to address its racist depictions, and the animated Disney film Aristocrats needed a disclaimer because it apparently featured racist caricatures of Asian peoples. Does this ever end?
I don't think it does end, James. And look, I'm partial to a James Bond movie or movies of that genre to go to the movies to escape, and that's what we all want to do. I mean, who doesn't want to see Daniel Craig dodging 38 gunmen at point-blank range, or watch Tom Cruise ride his motorbike off a mountain and land safely on the roof of a train? Look, here's the reality. We're old enough to remember the Event Cinemas ad that said, I want to escape to the movies. That's what I want. These offence police officers need to be reminded that's why we go. We don't want to be lectured when we go to the movies. And the truth is, if you don't like what's showing, don't go.
Good point. Well, if you're not going to watch the movies, you could always go to the cricket. And I love the cricket. But I've noticed as I've gotten older, my viewing habits have changed. As a kid, I couldn't get enough one-day cricket. And my teenage boys, they love T20. But I got to admit, the older I get, nothing beats test match cricket. I thought former Australian cricketer Kerry O'Keefe summed it up beautifully today, though I would never have put it quite like he did. Have a listen to this.
I'm a devotee of Test cricket. She's a grand old lady. I love her. She's 170 years old. She has her shortcomings, but she's a red ball game, outdoors, in the daytime. She's quite content with where she's at. She doesn't need Botox. She doesn't need filler. And eventually she will die. And at her grave will be Miss T20 in a tight miniskirt with stilettos and crocodile tears flowing. But Miss T20 will never have the history of Mrs. Test cricket.
Rocco, even if you didn't like cricket, you'd watch it for Kerry O'Keefe's commentary, wouldn't you?
That was brilliant, and you could apply that just to sport in general and how the virtue signalling and the money has taken over sport. I mean, with my name, obviously, I'm a fan of the round ball game, and I remember in the 70s and 80s, little clubs like Nottingham Forest and Malmo from Sweden beating the great Liverpools and the Bayern Munichs of the time, and that romance. And Andrew, you talked about movies being an escape. Well, sport's an escape too, and that kind of instant, like I say, challenge that you would get, and that gratification you get from seeing the minnow, the David beating the Goliath, is gone from sport. And Kerry just summed it up beautifully.
Well, really quickly to finish, I haven't seen the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film Wonka yet, but from all reports, it's pretty good. There's one thing, though. Apparently, a greedy chief of police gets fatter and fatter through the movie because he eats so much of Wonka's chocolate. Now, people are upset that it's fat-shaming. Andrew, seriously, is this cancel culture just gone too far?
Yeah, absolutely. It's gone way too far for way too long. I think most Australians are fed up with it, and they've stopped listening long ago. And so we need to adopt a mass attitude of non-compliance to their message.
Andrew, Rocco, thanks so much for your time. That's it from me. I'll be back next Friday, but stay with us because here's the Royal Report with Caroline de Russo.